That's Victoria. Victoria Flowers. Give her a round of applause. Come on up here. And Victoria, I'm going to turn this portion of the program over to you. And we also have Jeff Hovey. He's the Vice President of Transportation Energy Institute. Let's give Jeff and Victoria a round of applause. Let them hear you. Let them hear you.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm really pleased that we were invited to speak on this topic. You all are just awesome energy champions, and you're really focused on energy generation. Jeff and I are going to bring to you a little bit different of an approach about how do we help to decarbonize our society, right? The sky is falling. The air is on fire, right? We're heating up. I currently reside in northern Wisconsin in Ashland on the south shore of Lake Superior. Last year at this time, we were minus 30, and we had 30 feet of snow on the ground. This year, we have absolutely nothing on the ground, and it's 50 degrees on the south shore of Lake Superior. And one of the things that I heard from one of the Medeowan who lives next door to me, she said, the snakes are out already. She goes, the next thing is the bears are going to come out, and we're starting to see dandelions. Yeah. And what scares the heck out of me is that people are starting to tap their sugar bushes. If we get a cold snap while those sugar bushes are being tapped, those trees are going to die. So what we are going to offer is how do we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions within our communities to help reduce and slow down climate change. So decarbonizing transportation is going to be our session, and what we're going to do is we're going to play off of one another. Jeff and I know each other fairly well, and so we're going to go back and forth. And what I would encourage you to do is that if something comes up and you want to ask a question, raise your hand, because we want this to be interactive, have there be a lot of dialogue, because most people think when they think of transportation energy, right, you think of the drop in petroleum fuels. You think about electric vehicles. You think about some of the other emerging technologies, but there's way more out there than you can possibly even imagine. Jeff?
Number one, so Jeff Hovey, first time here. Thanks everybody for having me. Vicki told me just to show up and look pretty, but apparently I got to talk as well. So I wore my fancy jacket.
And your boots.
And my boots. So a little bit about TEI, quick, so you get some more background on who we are. We are an industry-led nonprofit group. We do not lobby. We do not take positions on policy. It's basically a broad spectrum of industry, and it could be large. On our board, we've got large retail groups like Walmart and Costco. We got major oil companies. We got major biofuel producers. We've got electric vehicle charging equipment providers. It's a broad spectrum. Vicki joined the board about 2 years ago now because we realized that, as you know, our goal on the board is to have this broad view of society, right? And we realized we had zero tribal representation on the board. So, you know, Vicki and I knew each other from some UST work that we've done in the past, and so we thought that was a good opportunity. We also have some Clean Cities folks on our board. American Lung Association just joined us as well. So we try to get a really good group. We are basically, for the lack of a better term, a research type think tank where we go out and we decide, you know, what is the discussion of topic, and then we go out and we create the funds, and then we produce the research, and it goes through our peer review process. So all of those groups I just mentioned and more, we've got about 70 people, 70 companies on our board of advisors right now. And it grows every year, but they all get a chance to review this report multiple times until it goes finalized, and then we put it out there. So all of our work is free for anybody. You can download it. You know, our goal is to make sure that policymakers are recognizing multiple issues that could arise when we're moving so fast in this transition to electrify, which we are, right? We are transitioning there. But, you know, one of the couple of red flags that come up are equity issues. You know, are we moving too fast where now all of a sudden we're creating gaps, you know, in society where you have the haves and the have-nots, and we want to avoid those situations. So we really look, you know, at a variety of different things as they relate to transportation. And again, I will say this is on-road. We do not get into rail. We don't get into avgas or marine, other than if we're talking about like renewable feedstocks and supply and demand. So that's
Great.
my intro.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. And I just want to make a point of clarification. Not only do I work for Oneida Engineering Solutions, which is also owned by the Oneida Nation, I am not an enrolled tribal member. However, I have worked for the nation and passionately done so for the last 20 years. And so with you, I'm wearing my ribbon skirt here to show solidarity with my brothers and sisters in Indian country, and I'm advocating for you in every single venue that I get the opportunity to. So with OES, the company that I am hired to work for, I am the technical consultant on the Tribal Clean Transportation Program that's put out by the Institute of Tribal Environmental Professionals. And they received a grant from a nonprofit, from a philanthropy group, to provide education and outreach to tribal communities about what tribal transportation clean energy options exist out there. So if you go to Northern Arizona's University Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, you'll see the link that will bring you to, they have bi-monthly calls, and there's about 100 participants on that call from all across Indian country to talk about the different transportation challenges, energy challenges that they're having. So I just wanted to put a plug out for that. I am here on their behalf, so if you want to find out more information about the Tribal Clean Transportation Program, I'll be more than happy to discuss that with you. You know, the next roundtable, as I stated, that they have is April 3rd. I encourage you to go ahead and get on there. And we've helped 3 tribes so far with looking at what EV infrastructure, you know, might be suitable for them. One tribe, in fact, in the Southwest, on the border of California, and I'm going to get the state wrong, Arizona? Am I right? Okay. They actually are along a large corridor in California, and California is one of the very few states that's actually set up with hydrogen infrastructure to potentially capitalize on any hydrogen infrastructure rollout that might happen. A lot of interest in that right now. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what are features of clean transportation. Those are alternative fuels. You know, and when we talk about alternative fuels, right, NEVI got all the press, and then we heard about alternative fuel corridors, and people were kind of scratching their head, and it's like, well, what does that mean? Doesn't that just mean electricity? No, it includes things like hydrogen, natural gas, biofuels, or a combination, or renewable gasoline, or renewable diesel. I mean, these are things that are out there that, you know, a lot of technology is developing and emerging, and there's a lot of money being thrown, you know, at this particular issue out of the Department of Energy and the Joint Office of the Department of Energy and Transportation. So the goal is, right, is to reduce fuel consumption emissions, right? You know, when you run your nice big truck down the road, right, you know, and you're spitting out carbon dioxide, you know, what we want to try to do is reduce those emissions, right? And we do that through improved engine designs that are supported by government policy and supported by initiatives that the car manufacturers have to actually produce more efficient vehicles. Using lighter weight materials, right? If you have a lighter vehicle, it's going to cost less energy to actually move it down the road. And then we want to reduce those air emissions. We want to reduce greenhouse gases. It might be too late. I'm hoping it's not too late, but I know up in the Lake Superior Basin, it's getting pretty scary. So again, government actions, things that your tribal government can do and that the federal government can do is to look at more public transportation, improve walking and biking routes, encourage cycling, encourage alternative work scenarios. So for me, for instance, when I used to have to drive in and out of the office, it was an 80-mile round trip. And you know, I didn't have the opportunity to move. So that was a huge, you know, emissions footprint that I was having. Now being able to work remotely from home, I don't have that. And so what I hope to do as the Oneida Nation starts to develop a sustainability and climate action plan is how can we capture those reductions in emissions, right, to put on their scope 1 emissions reductions, because I'm not driving in and out of the office anymore. Improved infrastructure, that goes without saying. That's what the NEVI funding is doing. But also, you know, there is also funding out there to support putting in other infrastructure to support alternative fueling. So for instance, the USDA has a grant that if you have an older gas station, you're able to put in a new gas station that's compatible with the ethanol and biofuel blends, and you can get up to 75% of your entire gas station. If you're replacing an old gas station, you can get up to 75% of that cost back. Has anybody here ever built a gas station? So you know they're expensive. So we just received a quote for a gas station in north central Montana, and it was $6 million, and it was only 24,000 gallons of fuel that we were storing. So that's renovating the inside of the store, that's completely upgrading the tank system. The tank system itself came in, it ranged between $1.4 million and $1.9 million. So that's something to think about. And when you think about that, it's like, wow, why would I invest in a new gas station because EV's coming and it's going to take this all away? But as you'll find out later in our presentation, people hold on to their vehicles a long time. And gas stations in Indian country are a critical part of infrastructure, especially emergency infrastructure. So if your gas station is the only gas station in 30 miles or 40 miles, if you have a disaster and you need to get your dump trucks out, your plow trucks out, whatever you might have to respond to a disaster, you don't want them having to run clear across the country to get gas to continue to respond to that emergency situation. So I would encourage you that as you look around your communities, you know, hopefully encourage leadership to continue to invest in maintaining that infrastructure, because if a release happens from an old tank, it's going to cost you $100,000 at least to address it. So that's really important to understand, you know, kind of these dynamics. They're not the things that people always think about. That's all I got to say about that. So Jeff, you're next.
Okay, so a little bit of the makeup that we see. Where is this reference? This is from the Energy Information Administration, EIA. So this data is readily available too, and it's updated constantly. And when we're looking at energy sources and usage, you know, this is just kind of a breakdown of our finished product fuels. Obviously, gasoline is the biggest. Our distillates or our ULSD, diesel fuel, you know, is second in line. So you start to get the picture of where our emissions are coming from. And I will add that, you know, we weren't always interested in emissions, right? I mean, the whole discussion, you know, what we try to do at TEI is we're following the policy. Right, we're responding to policy. Industry what needs to know how to respond to policy. So in about the past 3 years is really when we started to see a big uptick in carbon accounting. And you'll hear that term a lot. You know, as we start looking at, you know, whether it's an organization, a tribe as a whole, you know, looking at setting a baseline for what are our emissions across the board and start to do that accounting. And so this is just giving you an idea of the breakdown of the fuels that's coming through the refinery and the cracker and everything. So I think some of these slides will probably go through pretty quickly. So about 2 years ago, I said about. See, I'm from Wisconsin as well.
About.
I'm from Wisconsin too, so I apologize. So about 2 years ago, we did kind of this initial kickoff, right? We kept hearing, you hear a lot of garbage out there in media, right? At the time, we were hearing electric vehicles are actually worse for the climate than liquid fuels. So we said, okay, let's do a study on that. We put together a scope of work. We decided what the parameters were on how we were going to measure this. And then and this particular report was done by Ricardo. So all of our research goes out to third-party research firms, from the United States or Canada or Europe so far. And these were just some of the results, and it's kind of interesting. So in this particular piece of the report, we were comparing. So on the left, I don't know if everybody can see, on the left we've got the internal combustion engine. In the middle we're looking at, that should actually be plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. And on the right is your full battery electric vehicle. So you're getting an idea of what the emissions are from this vehicle. We used an SUV type model, so we did not use light duty. We did not use, heavy duty. This is a light duty vehicle, assuming 200,000 miles are getting put on this car. So we stretched it out a little bit more. And we used the average U.S. electricity mix. So what we see, of course, is for our gasoline engines, the vast majority of CO2 emissions, we'll call them GHG emissions, are from the tailpipe. And then likewise, for our battery electric, most of it's from the grid. So those are our two areas that we've got the ability to reduce those emissions, right? So on the left, we got to work on tailpipe, and then from the battery electric, it's more of a life cycle type assessment where we're looking at the grid carbon intensity, which is obviously improving every day. So that's doing pretty well. But as Vicki pointed out, the vehicles that are on the road today are staying on the road much longer. Our scrappage rates are getting reduced. It was like 7% scrappage rate would be the number. I think now we're using like 5% because these vehicles are staying on the road longer. Okay, so of that tailpipe emissions, we're going to jump right into. So again, this is a liquid fuel discussion. We could also talk about electric vehicles too. So if anybody has questions on that aspect later on, we could do that as well. But this is for the most part a liquid fuels discussion. TEI also has an electric vehicle council that's similar in nature to TEI, and so we jump into all that as well. But so from a low carbon fuel standard, here are all the feedstocks that we can choose from. And to try to give you an idea, so for everybody in the back, this is the units here are CO2 equivalent per megajoule. Let's just whatever, right? So this is 60, right here. So your gasoline is about 95 to 99. So that's not even on the chart, right? So what we're looking at is how much each one of these feedstocks, can improve our emissions. And we've probably got maybe got a better chart coming up here, but so like for corn right now, our carbon intensity is right around 55. We're working with another group too that's working on sustainable ag practices so that we can get that down to 30 or 20 and move that towards more of a net zero for the corn crop and other ag-based feedstocks. But again, you go through all of them. The whole point of this slide is that there are there's a lot of technology available out there that we can start reducing that tailpipe emission more quickly.
Jeff, something I want to bring up, and you and I talked about this the other day, was okay. So so we're already at maximum capacity with genetically modified corn for what it can produce as far as providing for ethanol, right? And the thing that you and I talked about was what's going to happen when we start having drought in these areas?
Right,
What's
right.
going to happen? So we have to really look very closely at where the future of our energy is going, and that's just something to consider, and kind of looping it back in sort of to this climate overall approach to things.
Yeah.
So, want me to take this, or
Yep.
you want to take it?
You
Okay.
go for it.
So, what does decarbonization mean, right? You know, so we talk about, and many of us have probably seen this, and it, you know, it changes a little bit, and this data is actually from 2019. But one of the things that, you know, I wanted to point out, you know, no big secret, 33% of our emissions come from transportation. Another 25, and that's light duty trucks, right? Light and heavy duty, and this actually includes, you know, the rail, the maritime, the aviation, and off-road vehicles. And, you know, one of the things that I found interesting as I was starting to get into this and understand this, the vehicle that is actually the worst emitter as far as per gallon of gasoline used are motorcycles. Yeah. So, you know, I think that's really interesting. So just something to think about. But, you know, you can kind of see the division there of where, you know, the greenhouse gas emissions come from. So again, you know, talking about policies that support these things, you know, we've seen a lot of these things come down the pike. But then, you know, the other thing is when we talk about life cycle analysis, the big thing is, right, you know, what do you do with the darn batteries, right? You know, that's something that is on everybody's mind. And where are we going to get the minerals to build these batteries? So one of the things that's of primary importance to particularly the tribes around the Lake Superior Basin is that we are rich with minerals up there, particularly iron and nickel and copper. And these mines, they are within the ceded territory of these tribes, and so they will be more disadvantaged, you know, going forward with increased mining. So we have to find a way to do better battery recycling. The EPA has a lot of funding out there. I think Department of Energy might even have some funding out there to support battery recycling initiatives. But there again, right, even recycling has a fairly high greenhouse gas footprint and energy input into it. So those are things to think about. And I did talk about the Higher Blends Infrastructure Program before. Jeff, you're next.
Yeah, yeah, and there was also the 45Z and 45V, I think, when we start talking about hydrogen and some other incentives. So all of those incentives that Vicki was showing, you know, a lot of them you can stack on top of one another, right? And including if you're blending the biofuels under the renewable fuel standard, or if you're in California and you got the low carbon fuel standard, and then you've got the IRS blenders credit. I mean, it's just stack and stack and stack. I mean, at one point, a couple of years ago, the tax credits were worth more than the gallon of fuel, and it was pretty crazy. So this goes to our earlier point too on how long vehicles are staying on the road. So I think let's see, where's the date on this? But it's
I think I got it from the decarbonization report.
yeah. So that would have been just last year, right?
Yep.
So the top line, what the point of this here is that how long are these vehicles going to stay on the road? We've got one assessment that basically says that, you know, we're trying to get to net zero. You know, we're making these net zero proclamations at the federal level. However, we're still going to have 40% of all internal combustion engines on the road by 2040. I mean, we're still going to have that many, you know, vehicles on the road. I mean, this uptake of electric vehicles is ramping up very quickly, and I love the fact that you guys are spending so much time on microgrid technology and ramping up on that end, because that's very, very important. We're not up here to talk about that, but I just love the fact that you guys are talking about that. So, of course, our heavy-duty vehicles have a much longer lifespan. And then the yellow line is our light-duty vehicle trucks, and then the red line is our light-duty vehicle cars. So on the road, so if a car is sold today, in 16 years, dang it, I just read this morning too. I don't want to screw it up for the people in the back. vehicles sold today will still be on the road in 16 years, and some will remain in operation for up to 30 years. So that's kind of how long they're going to be around. And of course, every year we're probably selling 12 million more. So every year we sell about 12 million more, internal combustion engine vehicles. So we have to deal with that carbon immediately, because the more we deal with it today, the bigger the impact will be in the long term. So,
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, and that's a statistic we didn't throw out there, right? There's about 300 million cars, internal combustion engine cars on the road today, and to Jeff's point, about 12 million of those get replaced every single year. So it's going to take a long time. And right now, the electric vehicle market, I don't know because I just saw a statistic come out. I don't know what the percentage is, but when this report was done, I think it was 7% of the vehicles sold were actually electric vehicles. So if you look at 7% of 12 million, that's the new cars coming in. And when I started doing this research, I reached out to all the contacts that I have in Indian country, and I said, what's your biggest concern about electric vehicles and how they're coming in? And I had more than 10 responses that said, where do old cars go to die? And and he said to me, he goes, res cars, and so that's the concern, right? Because then it creates another disadvantaged community issue, because and not only that, but then those internal combustion engine cars, when they're retired, they are sold, to lower income communities, right? Because they can't afford new cars. So, that really creates this whole thing of disadvantage. The other thing I might add, and I don't want to get too far off track here, but one of the things that came to mind, and we talked about this at the last board member meeting, was the weight of those cars. And does your current road infrastructure, is it going to support it, right? Because you're going to have greater and greater impact, right? Because the heavier the car, the more damage that you're going to get to the road over time, and your roads aren't going to last long. So those are things to definitely think about. One of the tribes we provided technical assistance for reached out, and they said, well, we want to think about how do we electrify our fleet. And I said, well, what you're going to want to look at is what your roads look like. So a Ford F-150 Lightning weighs 1,600 pounds more than its internal combustion engine counterpart. And one of the other things that they're finding is that 6 ppd, or I think that's how it is an emerging contaminant of concern. And it was discovered by one of the tribes in the Pacific Northwest that the salmon were starting to have some challenges. They were seeing some reproductive challenges. The fry weren't surviving as well. So 6 ppd is a chemical that's put into tires so that it stays stable and that the tires don't fall apart. And the thing is that there is no replacement for that right now. So EPA has identified that as an emerging contaminant of concern. We've identified it up in the Lake Superior Basin as well. So it's something to think about. It's not to say don't do it, but to understand fully the full range of impacts as we start to change over our vehicle fleets. Sorry, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I would, Vicky's right. There's so many nuances to it. You really got to look at, and it's been said multiple times this, today already, you have to look at your scenario, your situation, what you need those vehicles for. I mean, we're starting to see that operating an electric vehicle is 4 times less than operating a gasoline vehicle. That price parity between the two, the sale price, is starting to come together, right? Electric vehicles are still more expensive, but they're starting to match up. And so, the term energy burden was used earlier, and that's a great term to get to know, because energy burden is basically the weight of energy, on your members. The cost to live, the cost to drive, to heat, and everything. And it's a very, very important concept. And if you want some more information on that energy burden concept, Argonne National Labs they're the ones who did the map of the United States, and they mapped out underserved communities using this energy burden calculation, and it goes through the United States. My problem with that map is that the reservations were not really included on it. I mean, they're on there, they're on the map, but they're not assessed, and that's a huge problem. So they're on the map, and I hope they're working on it. We've been trying to, light a fire on them to try to figure out a way of solving that. All right, what's this colorful thing?
A flag.
Okay, so talk about ill-prepared, huh? Sorry. Ooh, that's pretty. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we got full fuel cycle greenhouse gas emissions, million metric tons CO2. So this is a measurement of emissions coming from different vehicles. So the yellow, the growing, is our light truck, right? That's going to be your larger SUVs and your pickup trucks, which is growing in the United States. Our light duty vehicles. So this is on-road emissions, right? When we got CAFE standards, to what Vicki was talking about earlier, what are really creating the super efficient gasoline engines. That's a big impact here, right? Because that's the less they consume, the less they're emitting on CO2. So that's part of it. It's not just that there's less of them on the road. It's just that they're becoming more efficient, and I think that's important to note. And then our Class 8, are up to our heavy duty trucks and stuff. Kind of same old.
All right. Let's see. So this is talking about NOx emissions, right? So when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, right, we're primarily talking about carbon dioxide. We're not talking about the particulate matter, the SOx and the NOx and that type of thing, but we are also starting to see, with the new formulations of gasoline, with the new engine technology, that these emissions are also going down as well too. And we don't want to forget about these, because these are the ones that really cause the public health impacts, right? The NOx does, the PM 2.5, is an asthma trigger as well too. So, I think it's really important that we recognize that while we still have a long ways to go, we've come a long way, right? So to my point, right, you look here in 2000, right, there's been some changes in the fuel since then. We can see, so here in 2005 is when the Energy Policy Act was passed, and then the Energy Independent Act was passed in 2007, which said, okay, you're going to start adding more renewable fuels, or at that time it's mostly ethanol and biodiesel, into our fuel distribution system. So when you go to the pump and you fuel up, right, you see premium, you see, E10, E15, and then you might have like an E85 or a diesel. And what most people don't know, particularly those in rural and remote communities, when I was helping a client build their new gas station, they said, oh, we don't want ethanol. I said, you do know that your regular gas is right now E10, that there's 10% ethanol in all regular gas except for premium. So in all cars built after 2001 are fully capable of taking E15 in their systems without damage to them. So I just want to put that out there. That's something most people don't know. Unless you're like my friend who bought a car, it said use premium only. Well, she doesn't like, to pay that extra couple pennies. Well, so she started putting the E10, the cheaper stuff, into her car, and her check engine light went on in her brand new car. So, she's going to be faced with a couple $1,000s worth of engine repairs because she didn't want to use the type of fuel that was stated.
Can we go back one, Vicki?
Yeah.
So the other thing that this tells me here, so a lot of us were around in 2000, and if you were in the fuel business, so this is our air quality emissions. So this is just one of them, right? So you've got NOx, you've got SOx, you've got PM 2.5, which is particulate matter, 2.5 microns, and then you got PM 10. But the important thing for me here to understand is that in 2000, when rules came out saying we are going to limit air quality, we want better quality air to breathe, we're going to make these limits, right? The OEM said that's not possible. We can't do that.
OEM is a original equipment manufacturer.
And the auto companies said we can't do that, right? So anytime there's a new federal rule or reg, it's always met with we can't do that, even though history tells us over and over again that we can do it. And I just think that that's an underlying message here. So if you take this air quality curve and you apply that to our greenhouse gas, our CO2 equivalent, right? Everyone's saying we can't do that. We can't do that. I'm a strong believer in that we definitely can.
So this graphic shows, one of the other things that we hear from folks is that, well, I can't use that fuel because of where I'm located in latitudes, right? It's too cold. It's not going to run well for me. And in some cases, there is some merit to some of that. But this graph really kind of shows what the difference is with the different mixes that we have and the fuel, how the greenhouse gas emissions track with warm and cold weather. So the light colored one is cold weather and the warm one is warm. Did I say that right? I can't remember. Okay, thinking through it. So, and that tracks and that makes sense. That's because vapor pressure changes and fuel efficiency changes when there's vapor pressure changes due to heat and cold. So, that's just something I wanted to point out there. But they still work generally. So, yeah, I don't like this slide. So what I want to talk about is, the traditional and alternative fuel landscape. As Jeff and I have been kind of highlighting here, there's an awful lot going on, right? Everybody gets excited about the bright new shiny thing. At the time when diesel fuel was really expensive several years ago, we started seeing a lot of compressed natural gas trucks come out. Then the price of diesel went down, and so compressed natural gas kind of fell out of favor. And now we're starting to see where there's some renewed interest in that, just simply because, trying to get, especially for fleet vehicles, trying to get their greenhouse gas footprint down. And so in this next little short presentation, Jeff and I are going to talk about what's available out there, right? So anybody have any idea how many underground storage tanks are sitting in the ground today? There's about 250,000 underground storage tanks that are sitting in the ground. And about the average age of those tanks is 25 years. Tanks have a warranted life of about 30 years. And so when your tanks start getting to that 30-year age, it becomes increasingly difficult to get the level of insurance you need to meet regulatory requirements. So that being said, right, so as we get to the 30-year mark of some of these tanks, gas station owners are going to be forced to make a decision about what am I going to do with these things? Is electric vehicles coming and taking over the world? What's going to happen? And like I stated earlier, you have to think about your community. If you're a tribe who has a gas station, these are things you have to think about. So currently, right, with our current infrastructure, petroleum, gasoline, and diesel have universal acceptance within our current fueling infrastructure. Right now, renewable gasoline and diesel, which is an emerging kind of market, and what that means is what they do is they take oils from seeds and they run them through the traditional refining process that oil currently goes through, and you come up with renewable gasoline and diesel. So that's what it is, and it is chemically, characteristic-wise, one-to-one the same as current petroleum products. So that's important to remember. And then we start getting into ethanol, E15 and E10. Right now, there's a move to make E15 available year-round across the country, and that's pretty important because when we start stepping down, depending on the practices used to grow the corn, when we go to E15, we can reduce emissions by up to 85% if we've got, good vehicles and, they're running efficiently. But what happened, right, so when ethanol came onto the market, people were putting it into old tanks. And what happens is because ethanol is an alcohol, it behaves differently, particularly in steel tanks. And so what was happening is they were dropping ethanol into old single-walled steel tanks, and they were basically cleaning them, scouring them, and there was starting to be a lot of releases. So, it's important to understand what fueling infrastructure currently exists at your facility so you can be sure that you don't have that. Like I said, an assessment and cleanup of an underground storage tank release can be anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million, depending on what resource it impacts. Like I said, it's compatible. E15 is compatible with all vehicles manufactured after 2001. I did talk about the infrastructure compatibility. And the carbon intensity of growing and harvesting practices, like Jeff said, it's actually decreasing. We were both at a renewable fuels for Minnesota, and it's amazing what they're doing now with some of these big corporate farms and these big giant farms. I mean, they know where every single solitary seed is planted. I mean, they're doing it by GPS, and it's crazy. And then they're having automated planting and automated fertilizing and those types of things. So the efficiency, whether you like it or not, it's happening, and it's important to understand that. Biodiesel, that's another plant-based type of fuel. Biodiesel, all diesel right now, with the exception of off-road, I think. I don't think off-road is B5. Yeah. It does? Okay. So B5, right? So we've had some problems with B5, and we've had some adoption issues with some of the big trucking firms because it does operate a little bit differently within the engine, and it can clog filters. And the reason the filters are getting clogged is because of the biodiesel component that's in that diesel mix right now. Is it makes the bugs really happy. And by bugs, I mean microbes. So those microbes start doing their thing, they're gobbling up that food, and they're emitting acetic acid, and it's coming up through the ports of the underground storage tank, and it's corroding all the equipment. And then when those bugs die and they fall to the bottom of the tank, right? And where does the pump sit in a tank? It sits at the bottom of the tank. So when they're distributing this B5 diesel, it's going into these trucks and they're clogging their filters, so they're having to do a lot of filter changes on these big heavy-duty trucks.
Yep. So I'll add a couple things to this slide. Depending on where you're at in the country right now, the renewable diesel, the second major bullet there, is widely available in California because of their policy. Their state policy is really lifting up renewable diesel, otherwise called RD. A lot of times you'll hear it called RD. About 60% of all the diesel fuel in California is renewable diesel fuel already. So it doesn't matter where it's being created in the country, it's all getting shipped to California to meet the California policy requirements. And so if you leave here today and say, okay, where can I find this stuff? You're not going to find any renewable diesel outside of California. Maybe you'll find some in Oregon because they also have a low carbon fuel standard and stuff. But for the most part, it's all going to California. So what's left here from a diesel standpoint, from a distillate standpoint, is your biodiesel. And we have folks in Chicago, we have folks in DC, large fleet operators that are running B20 year round. It's work, right? You have to manage it. You have to put in some things to kill the microbes, or you have to, be careful when you first introduce it because it will scour and clean out your tank, and you might have to change your filters out But then they worked through all of that over the course of the past 10 years. And so some of these folks are really, really good at running B20 all the way up to B100. So B100 is being used in Ames, Iowa for their city fleet. It's being used in Chicago, and it's being used by the fleet manager for the District of Columbia. So they're running B100. So it is possible. You just gotta have a fuels guy, really keeping an eye on that. On the ethanol end of things, most equipment, if you're going to go out and you're going to do a tank pull or you're going to rerun some piping and stuff, almost everything today is UL listed to meet E100 requirements. So if you're putting in new equipment, new tankage or something like that, yes, you definitely want to ask your contractor, what is this rated up to? Because I'm not sure if I'm going to sell E0, E15, maybe I want to go to E85 at some point, if it's available in your location, because the price is so much less. Granted, anytime you raise your ethanol content, you're decreasing your energy content slightly, right? So you gotta understand that too. So your mileage is going to get worse as you're running like an E85. But that's just a little more background on those. The best thing you can do is go to your fuel supplier and ask, okay, what's available here? Our tribe wants to reduce our Scope 1 emissions in our fleet. We need to look at what our options are for different fuels that we can go out and purchase and use. And then that's where you start that conversation. Because a lot of times they just might say, it's simply not available. But that doesn't discount the fact that if your tank system is 30 years old, you better start taking steps to replacing that equipment. Here again, here's just some, as we're looking at different fuels that the Institute is looking at, and we break this down, especially as we look at medium and heavy duty, right? The most difficult to decarbonize, because it's going to be really hard to electrify all the Class 8 trucks on the road. So, what are some of the best options out there? We were mapping out. We got a couple of other preliminary reports that are out there that look at the current availability. Currently available for alternative fuel vehicles, and then potential fuels off to your right. So of course we just talked about all of these here that are available. We can use this today. E85 is great, but they stopped making flex fuel vehicles, right? So you can't go out and go to an auto manufacturer and ask for a flex fuel vehicle anymore. You have to have a flex fuel vehicle in order to use E85. So whether or not they're going to start making them again, I don't know. It would be pretty cool if they did. At least then we could start ramping up and maybe testing some E30 fuels or something more, kind of push up against that a little bit more. And then the potential fuels are our pyrolysis, biomass to liquids. We'll talk a little bit more about e-fuels here in a minute. And then, of course, hydrogen. Those are ones that we're keeping an eye on. We've got ongoing research on it, looking at what's the marketability, what are the chances that this, one of these are going to, become marketable in the next 5, 10, 20 years. So these are all things that we got to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and one of the
potential fuels, which one do you think has the best prospects or most potential?
Everybody's going to disagree
investment
with
advice.
me. Everybody's going to disagree with me, but the unicorn of all these fuels is the e-fuels. It's just so damn expensive right now. I mean, it's like $40 a gallon. So the question is, at what point in time will the economics make sense? So, and we'll talk a little bit more about e-fuel, because e-fuels has a part of it is carbon capture, right? Capturing the carbon and then the electrolysis through renewable electricity of water, and then the synthesis of those two. But I've always been a big fan of e-fuels. But, I mean, it's out there a little ways.
Right, and to your point, and, for the green hydrogen, right, if we can really get green hydrogen going, that might help support more of a hydrogen economy, but presently, the infrastructure just simply doesn't exist in large parts of the country, and that's really the biggest challenge right now for that, and that means all the fueling stations are going to have to retool. And one of the things that I've learned working in this space is Watch what the equipment manufacturers are doing. Watch what the car manufacturers are building. Watch what the generator manufacturers are building, because they're the ones who are investing in this stuff, right? And that's where they're putting all their effort. You know, and that's just the best advice I can give you if you're making decisions for your tribe about, well, what way do I want to go?
Yeah. The e-fuels are a drop-in fuel too. So the
Right.
e-fuels can go into any vehicle, old, new. As far as we know right now, there's no compatibility issues. So all of those big, medium, and heavy-duty up to Class 8 trucks that are really hard to decarbonize, it's like, okay, how are we going to tackle this beast? Well, you know, that's one opportunity, right? And the bulk facilities, pipeline terminals, everything is already in place to handle those fuels. And we've got some major oil companies that are really behind it too, so they're throwing a lot of money at it.
Right, and just one thing on this slide. One of the things, so, you know, I live in Wisconsin. We have dairy cows. We have cheese. We have the Packers. And Jordan Love. So one of the things that's happening down south of Green Bay is they've put in anaerobic digesters to collect all the, so down in this area, there's probably close to 250,000 head of cattle that are held in a small area, and they generate a lot of waste. So what a company did was they had put in anaerobic digesters, and all the farmers now, rather than spreading the manure on the field, which has a carbon footprint, they're pumping it to these anaerobic digesters. These anaerobic digesters are doing their thing. They're stripping off the sulfur from that waste and running it through existing gas pipelines. That's okay. Are you voting for me? Sure, why not? So, and then Jeff, I'll let you talk. This is our last slide. Yeah, except for the conclusion side, that's all.
Yeah, and on the renewable natural gas slide too, I think that, you know, the reason why it hasn't really taken off is because it takes a fleet operator to say, it takes that whole supply chain to be communicating, right? You need to have the fleet operator saying, I want to invest in 50 compressed natural gas big trucks or vehicles, you know, and I'm going to need a fuel for that, and so I'm going to need a supplier for that. Then you have to work on a supplier, and you work yourself up that supply chain. You lock it all in. You know, back in 2006 or 2007, that's what people were trying to do, right? I think UPS was really big on renewable natural gas, and then UPS, the price of diesel just dove. And UPS pulled the plug on the whole thing, leaving all of these sites just stranded assets. So the forces of those, you know, market economics on the fuels and stuff are really impactful. And if you do find yourself talking about that, some type of fuel supply agreement like that, you know, just be aware that you really need to lock in on those terms and conditions so that you don't end up with those stranded assets. So again, my unicorn fuel is e-fuels. We have an ongoing study coming out, or it's going on right now. We're probably about 3/4 of the way done with it. As soon as we get the draft final done, we'll put it out to peer review, and then it goes through our peer review process a couple of different times until it's final. But right now, from our preliminary understanding, what we're seeing right now, first of all, the process, as we talked about. So down at the bottom, if you can't see it, we're looking at industrial sources. We're looking at carbon capture, right? So we're mitigating CO2 in the air, whether it's, you know, carbon capture just out of the air, or we're actually going to industrial sources like we're seeing at ethanol facilities that are pulling off CO2 right off their stacks and selling that in to carbonate your pop, whatever. But anyway, so, you know, we know we can do this. And then combining that CO2 with water, and it doesn't have to be fresh water. It doesn't have to be salt water. We now know that we can actually. It doesn't have to be. We know we can use salt water. We know we can use wastewater. Okay, so that was always my question, right? Why are we going to pump all this drinking water to make fuel? You know, but that's not the case apparently.
Well, and what I'll say to that, I just want to add, is that the military is actually using this technology out in the field. So this is the real deal. This is happening. So in places where they need fuel in remote areas, the military is actually using this technology right now.
Yep. So the water will go through electrolysis, and it's the electrolyzers. I try saying that word really fast. I hate that word. I just hate it. But that process right there, the equipment is extremely expensive. So we're kind of watching what the cost point is on that equipment. To then bring it together and synthesize the two using Fischer-Tropsch. Another word I can't stand. They're just full of it today. There's one other methodology too that it's very minimal. But anyway, from there you can get your drop-in fuels, and you can make your distillates, you can make your avgas, whatever type of fuel you're looking at. So the question is, why would we take this really nice green electricity and make a fuel out of it when we can put it right into the grid, right? The very legitimate point, right? Why go through all of this when we can just put this into the grid and electrify all of our vehicles? Well, we got some heavy-duty issues, right? We got some big vehicles we need to move around. And so we need the energy content of those liquid gallons, and but it's a very reasonable point. But so right now, what we're trying to do, what we're at in the report, we're looking at, okay, how would policy incentives have to stack up, like we talked about under the renewable fuel standard, LCFS or 45Z, whatever. How would they have to stack up to make this competitive with diesel fuel? That's the ultimate question. And then how can we bring the cost down so that it's actually marketable? So there's other pressures that can come up too, right? If I'm a big publicly traded company and I got a large fleet and I need to improve my ESG metrics on my Scope 1 emissions, maybe I'm going to pay a little bit more for my fuel. If that's going to make me look good to my shareholders and my board, and and that is happening today. That's not, I didn't just make that up. We've got a number of board members at TEI that are doing that. They are working with companies. They are paying a premium for these fuels like renewable diesel and other fuels.
So to conclude, I hope this gave everybody a kind of a big, broad overview of the portfolio of options that are available to tribes, as they implement their sustainability plans, their climate adaptation plans, about, the different types of decision points to be made relative to Scope 1 emissions, and particularly with your fleets and, the energy that we use. I mean, we don't have any answers. They're just considerations, and I guess what I'd like to do is, because I see him sitting out there ready to pounce, does anybody have any questions?
Yes. You showed a slide that from 2019 what the CO2 emissions were, and then what it was in 2022 by EIA. It shows there's a decline. Where's that decline coming from? Is it from generation or from EVs?
I don't know.
Can we go back to the slide real quick?
Yeah, sure.
It was two different slides.
Yeah. My sense is it would probably be from generation, because we've had a lot of new generation technologies come on, but I don't know the answer to that. Go ahead.
I don't either, but potentially, there's a lot more people working from home now. There's some social changes that have happened, and that might play a role in it as well.
Okay, then we have. Go ahead. You want to answer that? Did you say?
I think so. So they say gasoline consumption has peaked in 2017, right? So technically we should be seeing a downward trend, whether it's because it's engine efficiencies, or I think that's the vast majority of it is efficiencies.
Hi, thanks again. That's a really great talk, Jeff and Victoria. That's such a cool topic. I don't know if you can backtrack, and I'm going to look up the report later because I made a note of it. It's the graph with light-duty truck, light-duty car, heavy-duty truck. It's that line graph about projected lifespan. I just had a quick question about that. I guess I just don't really... right there, that's it right there. So if this report just came out last year based on I'm gonna 2023 sales data. I guess I just don't get how they forecast the differences between the three groups, say 10 years, 30 years from now. I guess if you could just maybe explain a little bit, how did they get this?
So I will. So that's a good question. That's a good question. Go read the report. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So there is so like in the appendix you'll see how we calculate it, but a lot of it has to do with scrappage rates, right? How long is the vehicle still going to be on the road after so many years? And that scrappage rate, like we said before, is getting pushed out there, further, or the scrappage rate is decreasing. It used to be, 7% were scrapped every year. Now it's like 5% is getting scrapped every year. So, it's just projections based upon what they're seeing being sold and then being retired.
Thanks.
That was a really bad answer. I'm sorry, man. Go read the report.
Okay.
Who the hell says that?
Anybody else? Oh, man, give them a round of applause, man. Let them hear you. Thank you so much. Again, Jeff and Victoria, they're going to be around for a little bit, right? You'll be around for a tad bit.